But where was it you first really experienced racism in your life?
I think it was just always there. It was always interwoven into my life because, and I think a lot of Black Adventists would probably agree with this. What happens often when because the Adventist community really values education, right? And so, regardless of where you start on the social spectrum, there's this value of church and faith and education that I think is a wonderful thing. And you see it if you go to an Andrews University graduation, you're going to see Latina and Latino kids going across and getting their diploma, and Black kids going across and getting their diploma, and white kids going across and getting their diploma. And it's normal within the culture of Adventism because there's this value on education. But what happens, I think, often to minority populations in the church is you get tokenized a lot. So because you have this education background, you are often put in positions to speak for an entire population. So what would happen is, you become the token kid in your high school to discuss various things with your white friends or with administration. Or in my particular case, I remember writing this article in high school where there was no box to check. So you had to check a box as a form to fill when you would go back to school. And there was no box to check for biracial children. You had to select either you are Black or you're white. And because I grew up in a home with both of my parents, I was just very committed to this biracial identity that I had. And so I remember writing an article and having so many of the white kids in particular just tell me, this is stupid. Why are you doing this? You're causing conflict, you're creating drama, because that's often what happens too, is anytime you even vocalize like, hey, this doesn't seem fair, or this seems unjust, or why is this not available for me, then you're causing the problem. So I remember just calling administrators and faculty, and because they kept telling me that different people were responsible for creating the forum. And then I wrote this journalistic article that year that actually ended up getting second in the Michigan Interscholastic Press Association out of like 1,500 articles. So it's always been part of the conversation and part of your identity. And I think that where you'll experience racism, because I think people will have this understanding or this misunderstanding that racism is just people are saying the N-word at my office. And that's not the reality of what most Black people, I think, are experiencing on a daily basis. Is there that? Yes. But often what we experience is far more subtle. And I think what we would call them is microaggressions, or this basic understanding that your experience is invalidated. That like tons, and you'll see this even online, right? Tons of Black people, the majority of the Black community will say there is a racial problem in the United States. And then our white friends will share the one Black person who agrees with their position and say that token or that one story invalidates the majority of what everybody else is saying. So what you go through life with this understanding that there's the white way and that's it. And you have to learn to assimilate yourself towards whiteness in order to be successful. And I'll share a really just brief example of that, but I think it's a micro example that shows the systemic problem. During my PhD defense at Andrews University, I actually tweeted about this and it went viral. So this is something that I think a lot of Black people understand. During my PhD defense, I can't remember how this part of the conversation even got brought up, but because my defense wasn't about race at all. But one of the people on my panel said to me, so she asked some question about race and I answered it. And then she said, so are you saying that you think that racism is affecting kids in their classroom environment? And I said to her, well, I can tell you that as a Black student, before I walked in here this morning, I straightened my hair. I straightened my hair because I knew that if I left my hair in its natural state, the way I was born, the way God made my hair, if I was to walk in here and give this exact same presentation with just my natural hair, it would have changed the way you, my white educator, perceived me. And when I said that, the entire room was silent. And then one of the Black professors tried to change the topic of conversation. I think he felt obviously uncomfortable with his colleague's comment. And then she jumped in again and said, well, I can tell you, I don't think that it's racism. I just think that Black people, she said, I think it's more about poverty, but Black people are just super loud. So right here, as I'm trying to just defend and I'm just trying to get my own PhD that I've spent 6 years working on. And here comes this conversation. And I have to now validate the experience or the Black experience for students, which everybody knows in the research that Black students are largely expelled and suspended. When you look at the population between how many Black students and how many white students and what we do, the same offense that a white student would just, get a detention for, a Black student gets suspended for. My husband worked in education. We know this. The research shows us. She's an educator. She knows this. And yet here I am at my own PhD defense in an Adventist church community of faith in a diverse town, having the exact same conversation. And her words, which she said, which was, well, Black people are just so loud. That is another microaggression, which is if a Black person ever challenges the white normalcy or status quo, you're just being loud. You're just being angry. So, and it changes the way Black people have to even enter into any conversations about this. I'm a writer for the Barna Group, and we know that largely, this is, I like to bring this up because the race issue is largely like a Christian issue. We know in the country, when you ask people who are secular, do you believe that there's a race problem in America? They say yes. If you ask white Christians, if there's a problem, they say no. I think in the last study we just did, and this is in 2020 with the Barna Group, it was like 38% of white Christians say that there's no racial problems in the United States. And something like 80% of Black Christians say that there is absolutely a racial problem in the United States. And in comparison to non-religiously affiliated people, white people are twice as likely, if you're a Christian, to believe that there are no racial problems than if you're not a Christian. So I'm grateful that we're having these conversations in the church setting, because I just think that the church could, if it chose to, largely impact the entire conversation of race in this country, if they would first just sit down and acknowledge that there's a problem. And so I think that these last few months as a country, we're starting to see people do that. And I am so grateful as a Black woman and a biracial woman and a Christian. I am so grateful for these conversations.
Wow. You said so many things that are so important. I'm not going to be able to think of all the things I want to ask you, but let's stay on this topic of racism in the church or the Christian. That's really interesting information. And I have my own personal idea why I think most Christians, or 38% at least, that Barna has found out about, would say there's no racism. But why? Tell me first, before we talk more about the church, why do you think it is most Christians are saying, well, there's no racism?
I'd be curious as to what your thoughts are.
Mine are not educated. But mine...
Because it's so hard for me to understand.
Yeah.
I can't understand how anybody could say that we have no race. I mean, the research is so clear. So it's very hard for me as an informed person to understand why people would say it doesn't exist, other than just because you don't want to. Like, if we don't talk about it, then I guess it doesn't exist. Well,
I'll tell you, like I said, I'm not a researcher or anything like that, but as a pastor, as a theologian, and I say that even lightly, I think the main reason is because if they would say that there is, then it's an admission to something that is very wrong in their Christian walk. In other words, the people who should be the least prejudiced and the least racist on the whole planet are Christians by Christ's own example. And then to say that we have a problem would be to admit that we haven't really followed in Christ's footsteps the way we should. And so I think that there's a hesitation or even a willingness to put on blinders to think of ourselves as better Christians than maybe we have been a witness to be. So again, that's just what I think, Heather. I have no research or anything to back that up. But I think I've seen that in some of my friends who I have talked to who say, oh, there's no issue. And I think, yeah, there's a huge issue, and there's some blinders on here. So I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
Yeah, it does.